The Yellow Jack and the Earthshakers. An American epic. The Hook. Forget the gold rush. Forget the transcontinental railroad. The single most transformative, audacious, and blood-soaked engineering project in American history wasn't built on U.S. soil, but on a razor-thin strip of pestilence-ridden jungle where the Atlantic meets the Pacific. It was a place where more men died of a mosquito bite than from a dynamite blast, before a single American steam shovel arrived. The French had already spent $287 million, over $8 billion today, and buried 20,000 workers, defeated not by rock or mud, but by an invisible, humming assassin. When the U.S. took over, they weren't just digging a ditch. They were waging a total war against nature, time, and the deadly secret of the tropics. This is the story of how an American general and a forgotten doctor changed global commerce forever by hunting down the most dangerous creature on Earth. The narrative: the conquest of Culebra. The year is 1904. The air in Colón, Panama, is not just hot. It is a suffocating, living entity, thick with the stench of stagnant water, decaying vegetation, and the faint, metallic tang of fear. When the American forces first arrived, they didn't find a grand construction site. They found a graveyard. The French camp, abandoned after Ferdinand de Lesseps' spectacular failure, was a nightmare museum. Rail cars rusted on overgrown tracks, their wheels half buried in the relentless jungle growth. Everywhere, in the moldering hospitals and the cemetery plots, was the evidence of the French defeat. The French had believed the diseases were an unavoidable curse of the tropics, a miasma rising from the swamps. The Americans, however, arrived with an intelligence the French never had, a revolutionary, ridiculed medical theory championed by a U.S. Army physician, Colonel William C. Gorgas. Gorgas was a veteran of the campaign in Havana, where he and his team had demonstrated that the mosquito, specifically the Aedes aegypti for yellow fever and the Anopheles for malaria, was the sole vector of these scourges. The diseases were not in the water or the air. They were in the bug. His mandate in Panama was simple: make the canal zone habitable. But implementing his radical vision was a war in itself. Within the first 9 months of American occupation, yellow fever struck. The initial American workforce panicked and fled by the hundreds, terrified they would wake up with the deadly headache. The construction effort stalled. It took the arrival of Chief Engineer John F. Stevens to turn the tide. Stevens provided Gorgas with the full, unreserved backing he needed. The war on the mosquito began in earnest, a massive, methodical undertaking. Fumigation squads sealed buildings and burned sulfur. Tens of thousands of ditches were dug to drain swamps. Crews sprayed a thin film of crude oil over every remaining body of water, preventing larvae from breathing. Every single building was screened with fine mesh wire. Within 2 years, the almost miraculous occurred. Yellow fever was eradicated from the canal zone. Malaria was brought under control. Gorgas had made the unimaginable possible: a thriving, healthy American community in the most disease-ridden stretch of land in the world. With the biological war won, the real engineering challenge began. The battle against the continental divide, the 7-mile stretch known simply as Culebra Cut, later Gaillard Cut. This was a mix of volcanic rock, clay, and shale, all saturated with tropical rain. The Americans ultimately excavated enough earth and rock to build a replica of the Great Wall of China that stretched halfway across the United States. The sounds of the cut were the continuous kaboom of dynamite charges, the shriek of steam shovels, and the rhythmic groan of the dirt trains. But the danger was relentless from the earth itself. The constant rains and geological instability led to terrifying slides. Entire sides of the cut, hundreds of thousands of cubic yards of rock and clay, would suddenly shear off, burying track and equipment, wiping out weeks of work in a matter of minutes. Stevens, exhausted, resigned. In his place came Colonel George Washington Goethals, an Army Corps of Engineers officer. Goethals' genius was management. He imposed a rigid military discipline, becoming a benign dictator of dirt, organizing the tens of thousands of workers into a finely tuned machine, coordinating trains and shovels with the precision of a Swiss clock. Culebra Cut became a symbol of national will, the belief that American technology could literally cleave a continent in two. The concrete colossus, harnessing the tides. The digging of the cut was a victory of muscle. The next act was a victory of concrete and physics. The building of the Gatun locks, and the creation of the massive man-made Gatun Lake. The linchpin was the Gatun Dam, a 1.5 mile long earth dam built across the Chagres River Valley. When the gates here closed, the water began to rise, slowly drowning the surrounding jungle and creating Gatun Lake, at the time, the largest man-made lake in the world. This immense lake became the central, high-altitude highway of the canal. The Gatun locks were the heart of the system, designed to lift ships 85 feet from sea level in 3 stages. The sheer volume of concrete poured into the lock forms was enough to build a wall 8 feet thick, 12 feet high, and extending from New York to Philadelphia. The brilliance lay in the simple physics. No pumps were used. Gravity did all the work, with water flowing from the high Gatun Lake through massive culverts to fill or empty a chamber in just 8 to 15 minutes. The lock gates were colossal, hollow structures of steel, the largest standing 82 feet high, each half weighing up to 745 tons. They operated with almost impossible grace, swung open by small electric motors. The effort cost the lives of 5,609 official workers during the American phase, a testament to Gorgas's sanitary victory, but still a horrific toll. The construction effort was carried out by a vast, sprawling, and deeply segregated society managed by 2 parallel pay systems. The gold roll, reserved almost exclusively for skilled white American and high-level European employees, paid in U.S. gold currency, and provided with the best amenities. The silver roll, for the vast majority of the manual laborers, who were primarily West Indian, especially from Barbados, Spanish, and Italian. They were paid in Panamanian silver, housed in crowded barracks, and subject to harsher conditions. The canal was built on their backs, a silent, essential contribution. The Isthmus, the President, and the shadow of war. Before the U.S. could conquer the jungle, it had to acquire the land, which belonged to Colombia. When the Colombian Senate rejected the treaty, President Theodore Roosevelt was furious. He viewed the obstruction as intolerable. On November 3, 1903, Roosevelt orchestrated a political coup. He effectively backed a swift, almost bloodless Panamanian revolution against Colombia, using the presence of the U.S. Navy gunboat, the USS Nashville, to ensure the success of the separatists. Within days, the new nation of Panama signed a treaty granting the U.S. a perpetual lease over the 10-mile-wide canal zone. Roosevelt later famously boasted, "I took the Isthmus." By the summer of 1913, the work was nearly finished. On October 10, 1913, President Woodrow Wilson pressed a telegraph key in the White House, detonating a dynamite charge that breached the last earthen barrier, allowing the waters of the Pacific to surge into the Gaillard Cut. The great spectacle that Roosevelt and Goethals had planned for the opening was canceled. On August 15, 1914, the small American cement ship SS Ancon made the first official transit in 9 hours. The triumph, however, was immediately overshadowed. Just 2 weeks before the Ancon's historic voyage, the nations of Europe had plunged into the cataclysm of World War I. The momentous opening of the world's greatest engineering feat was relegated to the back pages of newspapers. The legacy, the cost of the American enterprise was staggering, $375 million, over $10 billion today. But the rewards were revolutionary. The Panama Canal instantly and fundamentally redrew the map of global commerce and military power. The 8,000-mile journey around Cape Horn was replaced by a quick, efficient 50-mile passage. For the U.S. Navy, the canal was a strategic game-changer, allowing warships to move quickly between the Atlantic and Pacific Oceans. It was the single most important factor in the rise of the United States as the dominant global naval power of the 20th century. The Great Ditch stood, and still stands, as a monument to the audacity of a young nation that literally chose to cleave a continent in two, to reshape the world in its own image. The Yellow Jack had been defeated. The Earthshakers had done their work, and the oceans were finally united.